The Honourable Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, they say that leadership's about priorities, and I'm not 100% sure the Prime Minister's got his priorities right, that he devoted 10 minutes of his time to listening to Stephen Joyce. If there's any indication that the Prime Minister of New Zealand has his priorities wrong, it is that. But it was an interesting thing that happened in New Zealand towards the beginning of last week. New Zealanders recoiled in horror, Mr Speaker, at the sight of the President of a great country, the United States of America, instituting a policy, the so-called Muslim ban, that runs absolutely counter to what this country stands for. A spirit of tolerance and acceptance, a spirit of inclusion, of openness, of accepting the world's most vulnerable people into your nation. And New Zealanders right across the political spectrum, people who aren't even that interested in politics, recoiled in horror at seeing that kind of policy implemented. And they looked to their new Prime Minister. And what did he do? He blinked. He froze. For 2 days, there was nothing, not a word. The media had to chase him down. He was on holiday for Auckland Anniversary Day. It's a hell of a long way from Dipton, Mr Speaker, and even further from Messines Road and Karori in some ways. He froze. He wasn't there. He didn't stand up. And in contrast, Mr Speaker, here's what somebody else said. In a world of turmoil, when we seem to be going backwards at an alarming speed, New Zealand must stand up and be counted amongst the mature and civilised nations who know that the only way forward is tolerance. That's Andrew Little. That's leadership. Andrew Little stood up and said New Zealand can do two things in the face of this. We can fulfil our destiny as a country that stands up to bullies, that welcomes people by doubling our refugee quota. And he also said that we could stand up, stick our neck up and say something to world leaders. And Bill English wasn't there. And that, Mr Speaker, is because New Zealand's got a Prime Minister at the moment, but it doesn't have a leader. Just imagine what would have happened with Norman Kirk when he faced down French nuclear testing, or David Lange when it came to warship visits and a nuclear-free New Zealand, or even Helen Clark when it came to the very issue of refugees on the Tampa, albeit with Iraq. That's New Zealand leaders standing up. Bill English, faced with his first challenge for that, blinks, freezes, takes a focus group, comes back a few days later and finally says something. That is not leadership. It's not standing up for New Zealand's values. To paraphrase Lloyd Benson, Mr Speaker, the former American politician, he ain't no John Key. Bill English ain't no John Key. And that is clear every single day to New Zealanders who have backed John Key, and we have to acknowledge that they have for the last few elections, because they backed the leader that they believed in. That's not the person I saw here today. The person I saw here today was weak and without vision and without a plan for New Zealand for the future. And that question of leadership is what New Zealanders will look for. They'll look for a leader who stands up, who does not run away. And runaway Bill is what we are seeing. Andrew Little stood up at Waitangi, Bill English ran away. We've got a Mount Albert by-election going on, and the National Party under Bill English ran away. Don't want to be part of it. The Pike River families came here as they had been promised by the National Party that somebody would look after them and would do everything that it took. They came here and Bill English ran away. We can't have a runaway Prime Minister. We need a leader. The only signs of leadership I have seen this year have come from Andrew Little, and with our support partners in the Greens, what we have seen from Bill English is that he has failed that key test of leadership. In his speech today, Bill English talked about the long-term interests of New Zealand. Well, Mr Speaker, that is right, Dr Smith. What is it about the long-term interests of New Zealand that sees $1.7 billion cut from the health budget? What is it about the long-term interests of New Zealand that sees education funding for schools frozen and parents having to reach deeper and deeper into their pockets? What is it about the long-term interests of New Zealand that means that since 2009, the national government has not put 1 cent into the super fund. They are stealing from future generations, Mr. Speaker. They made a promise that when the books got back into surplus, and that took them a bit longer than they thought, they would restart contributions to the super fund. And they have not. And future generations are now $18 billion worse off because this government hasn't restarted contributions to the super fund. $18 billion stolen from the next generation of New Zealanders. And we hear line after line from the national government about their amazing management of the economy. I'll tell you what's irresponsible about managing the economy. $18 billion taken off the next generation, pushing a problem away. That's not looking after the long-term interests of New Zealand. They're looking after their own short-term interests, Mr. Speaker. What we need is a government that is prepared to invest in our future, and that is the priority for the Labour government. We're not prepared to sit around and rely on an economy built on a sandcastle of record household debt, speculation in the housing market, and chasing the gold rush. Now it's tourism, it was dairy. We actually need an economy that's founded on a sustainable long-term plan for New Zealand. An economy that recognises, let's just start with this, that education and investment in education is the most critical indicator of economic success for a country. Look around the world, Mr. Speaker, and you will see the countries that succeed, the countries that have wealth, the countries that have good quality of life, are those that invest heavily in education. And if you wanted any lesson about how this is not a government for the long-term interests of New Zealand, take a look at the figures for those young people not in employment, not in education, and not in training, the so-called NEETs. 90,000, Mr. Speaker. More people than the population of Palmerston North. 15 to 24-year-olds who are not working, who are not earning, who are not learning. That has to, and he told us they were pretty damn hopeless, those people, but that government ignored that. Unemployment went up last week, Mr. Speaker, 5.2%. That's not success. 90,000 young people not earning or learning, that's not success. And we have the plan, Dr. Smith, to do something about it. Because we have spent the last 2 years listening to New Zealanders about what is needed to make sure that young people have success in the future. And that means 3 years free post-secondary school training and education. No one will leave school not knowing what they're going to be able to do next. Every young person in New Zealand will have the training, have the opportunities to adapt and be part of a new economy. And we're going to make sure that there's proper career guidance in every single school. We're going to make sure that there's programs like Ready to Work and Gateway that are targeted and tailored to people who are struggling to work out what to do next, struggling to get the training and the skills they need to get a job. We're going to invest properly in that. And, Mr. Speaker, we're going to make sure that apprenticeships are available through our Dole for Apprenticeship scheme. Why not take that up today? Why doesn't the national government take that up today? If you're a young person on the dole, let's take that money and give it to an employer as a subsidy to take on an apprentice. We're not, Mr. Speaker, prepared to sit back and let 90,000 young people do nothing. This Labour Party is going to prioritise that kind of investment in the future. Mr. Speaker, our plan for housing means that all New Zealanders can expect the security that comes with housing. And sometimes when we have the debate about housing, it is about the technicalities of how many homes we're going to build, 100,000 over 10 years. It is about cracking down on speculators through getting rid of negative gearing, through making sure that those people who aren't prepared to come and live here can't buy an existing house. But let's be clear about what housing really is about. Having a home that is yours or that you are secure in your tenancy is about building a strong community. Because without that, people do feel insecure. So housing is at the core of what the next Labour government will do because it will help provide security. Education and training are at the core of what we will do because that is about providing opportunity, as is a properly funded public health system. And, Mr. Speaker, we will make sure that New Zealanders' values are stood up for and that real leadership comes. That will come with an Andrew Little-led government.